It all started with a mailbox. A simple, unassuming mailbox sitting at the end of a quiet suburban driveway. For most people, it's just a box, a place to drop off bills, birthday cards, and the occasional package. But for Marcus, a hard-working, black man in his late 30s, that mailbox became the center of a bizarre and infuriating saga. It wasn't just a mailbox anymore. It was a symbol, a target, and eventually the spark that lit a fire he never saw coming. Marcus had lived in his neighborhood for years. It was the kind of place where people waved hello but didn't always stop to chat. He kept to himself, working long hours as a mechanic and spending his weekends tinkering with cars in his garage. Life was quiet, predictable, and that's exactly how he liked it. But then one morning everything changed. He stepped outside to grab his mail and found his mailbox lying in pieces on the ground, smashed, destroyed. At first he thought it was an accident. Maybe a reckless driver had clipped it in the night. He replaced it, shrugged it off, and moved. But then it happened again, and again, and again. Enter Karen. She lived a few houses down, and Marcus had never had much interaction with her. She was one of those neighbors who always seemed to be watching, always had something to say, and never missed an opportunity to make her presence known. At first, Marcus didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the pattern was hard to ignore. Every time he replaced the mailbox, it would mysteriously get destroyed within days. And every time, Karen was there, watching, smirking, sometimes even making snide comments under her breath. "Oh, another new mailbox?" she'd say, her tone dripping with mock innocence. What a shame. Marcus tried to be the bigger person. He confronted her politely, asking if she knew anything about the damage. She denied it, of course, but the glint in her eye told a different story. He even went to the homeowners association, but without proof, there was nothing they could do. Frustrated but determined, Marcus decided to take matters into his own hands. If Karen wanted to play games, he was ready to play back, but on his terms. That's when he came up with the idea. A mailbox wasn't going to cut it anymore. If Karen wanted to smash something, she was going to have to work for it. Marcus spent weeks designing and building a replacement, something sturdy, unbreakable, and, frankly, a little over the top. He welded together a steel wall, reinforced it with concrete, and anchored it deep into the ground. It wasn't just a mailbox anymore. It was a statement, a fortress. And when he installed it at the end of his driveway, he couldn't help but smile. Let her try to smash this. The neighborhood buzzed with curiosity. People drove by just to see Marcus's new mailbox. Karen, of course, was not amused. She stood on her porch, arms crossed, glaring at the steel wall like it had personally offended her. Marcus could feel the tension building, like a storm, cloud ready to burst. He knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to back down, and neither was he. But what happened next? Well, that's where things took a turn no one could have predicted. The steel wall stood strong, but Karen's next move was something Marcus never saw coming. It wasn't just about the mailbox anymore. It was about pride, power, and who would come out on top. And as the days turned into weeks, the quiet suburban street became a battleground, one that would leave everyone talking. So what did Karen do next? How far was she willing to go? And would Marcus's steel wall be enough to stop her? Stick around, because this story is just getting started, and trust me, you won't believe what happens next. The steel wall stood tall and unyielding at the end of Marcus's driveway, a gleaming monument to his determination. It wasn't just mailbox anymore. It was a message to Karen, to the neighborhood, and to anyone else who thought they could push him around. But as the days passed, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Karen's silence was unnerving. She hadn't said a word to him since the wall went up, but he could feel her eyes on him every time he stepped outside. It was like she was waiting, plotting, biding her time. And Marcus knew better than to underestimate her, to understand how things had gotten to this point. You'd have to rewind a bit. Marcus had moved into the neighborhood 5 years ago, drawn by the quiet streets and the promise of a fresh start. He'd worked hard to buy the house, pouring his savings into the down payment and spending countless weekends fixing it up. It wasn't much, a modest two-bedroom with a small yard, but it was his. And for a while, life was good. He kept to himself, focusing on his job and his hobbies, and for the most part, his neighbors did the same. Karen, on the other hand, had been there for decades. She was one of those people who seemed to think the neighborhood belonged to her. She was the self-appointed watchdog, always quick to point out when someone's grass was too long or their trash cans were left out too late. Most people just rolled their eyes and avoided her, but Marcus had never had the luxury of staying under her radar. From the moment he moved in, she'd been different with him. Her comments were sharper, her tone colder. At first, he tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just having a bad day. But as time went on, it became clear that her attitude wasn't going to change. The mailbox incident started about 6 months ago. At first, Marcus thought it was just bad luck. Maybe kids were messing around or a delivery driver had hit it by accident. But when it happened a second time, then a third, he started to suspect something more. The damage was too deliberate, too targeted. And then there was Karen. She was always there, watching, smirking, making little comments that made his blood boil. "Oh, another new mailbox?" she'd say, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You must have terrible luck." Marcus tried to ignore her. He didn't want to cause trouble, didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing she was getting to him. But after the fourth mailbox was destroyed, he'd had enough. He confronted her calmly but firmly, asking if she knew anything about what was happening. She denied it, of course, but the way she looked at him, like she was daring him to accuse her, told him everything he needed to know. That's when he decided to take matters into his own hands. He wasn't going to let her win. He wasn't going to let her intimidate him. So he built the steel wall. It wasn't just a practical solution, it was a statement, a declaration that he wasn't going to back down. And for a while it seemed to work. The wall stood strong and Karen stayed quiet, but Marcus knew better than to think it was over. The tension in the neighborhood was palpable. People whispered about the feud between Marcus and Karen, some taking sides, others just watching. From the sidelines, the homeowners association even got involved, sending Marcus a letter about the unsightly structure at the end of his driveway. But Marcus didn't care. He wasn't going to let anyone tell him how to handle his own property. And then, one morning, everything changed. Marcus woke up to find something scrawled across the steel wall in bright red paint. The words were crude, hateful, and impossible to ignore. His heart raced as he read them, his hands clenching into fists. This wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. This was personal. Karen was standing on her porch, watching him with that same smug expression. Marcus wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but he knew better. She'd just deny it, just like she always did. And without proof, there was nothing he could do. But Marcus wasn't the type to give up. If Karen wanted a fight, she was going to get one. He started documenting everything, taking pictures, keeping a journal, even setting up a security camera. He wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not again. As the days turned into weeks, the tension only grew. Karen's tactics became more brazen, more aggressive. She started spreading rumors about Marcus, telling anyone who would listen that he was a troublemaker, that he didn't belong in the neighborhood. Some people believed her, others didn't. But either way, the damage was done. Marcus tried to stay focused, to keep his head down and his eyes on the prize. But it was hard. Every day felt like a battle, every interaction a test of his patience. And through it all, the steel wall stood as a reminder of what was at stake. But then, one night, something happened that changed everything. Marcus was woken up by a loud crash, the sound of metal hitting metal. He rushed outside, his heart pounding, only to find the steel wall untouched. But something was different. Something was off. And that's when he saw it. A single envelope, tucked into the slot of the steel wall. It wasn't addressed to him. It wasn't even sealed. But inside was a note, written in the same red paint that had defaced the wall just days before. The message was short, but it sent a chill down Marcus's spine. "You think you've won," it read, "but this isn't over." Marcus stood there, staring at the note, his mind racing. What did it mean? What was Karen planning? And more importantly, what was he going to do about it? The steel wall had been his answer, his solution. But now, it felt like just the beginning. The battle lines had been drawn, and Marcus knew there was no turning back. But what happened next? What was Karen's next move? And how far was Marcus willing to go to protect what was his? The answers were coming. But for now, all Marcus could do was wait and wonder. The note left in the steel wall's mailbox slot was like a spark in dry grass, igniting a fire that Marcus couldn't ignore. He read the words over and over, the red paint smudged but still legible. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." His hands trembled as he crumpled the paper, his mind racing with possibilities. What was Karen planning? Was this a threat, a warning, or just another one of her mind games? He didn't know, but he couldn't afford to take any chances. Marcus decided to step up his game. He installed more security cameras around his property, making sure every angle was covered. He started keeping a detailed log of every interaction with Karen, no matter how small. He even reached out to a few neighbors he trusted, asking if they'd noticed anything unusual. Most of them were sympathetic, but no one wanted to get involved. "It's just a mailbox," one neighbor said, shrugging. "Why don't you just let it go?" But Marcus couldn't let it go. Not now, not after everything that had happened. Meanwhile, Karen was far from idle. She seemed to be everywhere, her presence looming over the neighborhood like a dark cloud. She started hosting weekly neighborhood meetings at her house, inviting everyone except Marcus. At first, it seemed harmless, just a bunch of people, sitting around drinking coffee and complaining about property values. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. What were they talking about? Were they plotting something? Or was he just being paranoid? The tension between Marcus and Karen began to spill over into the rest of the neighborhood. People started taking sides, some siding with Marcus, others with Karen. The once quiet street became a battleground, with whispered arguments and sideways glances replacing the friendly waves and small talk. Even the kids seemed to sense the tension, their games growing quieter, their laughter more subdued. One afternoon, Marcus came home to find a flyer taped to his front door. It was an announcement for a community cleanup day, organized by Karen. The event was scheduled for the following weekend, and the flyer listed a series of tasks, including removing unsightly structures from the neighborhood. Marcus's stomach dropped as he read the words. Was this a direct attack on his steel wall? Or was it just another one of Karen's power plays? He decided to attend the cleanup day, not because he wanted to, but because he needed to know what was going on. When he arrived, Karen was already there, clipboard in hand, barking orders at a small group of volunteers. She glanced at Marcus as he approached, her lips curling into a tight smile. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look who decided to join us." Marcus ignored the jab, focusing instead on the task at hand. He spent the morning picking up litter and trimming hedges, all while keeping a close eye on Karen. She seemed to be everywhere, directing traffic, handing out supplies, and making sure everyone knew she was in charge. But as the day wore on, Marcus noticed something strange. Every time he turned around, Karen was watching him, her eyes narrow, her expression unreadable. The tension came to a head when one of the volunteers, a young guy Marcus had never seen, approached the steel wall with a crowbar. "Hey!" Marcus shouted, rushing over. "What do you think you're doing?" The guy froze, looking nervously at Karen. She said this thing needed to go," he stammered, pointing at the wall. Marcus turned to Karen, his blood boiling. "Is this what this is about?" he demanded. "You think you can just tear down my property because you don't like it?" Karen crossed her arms, her smile never wavering. "This isn't about what I like," she said coolly. "It's about what's best for the neighborhood. That thing is an eyesore, and it's bringing down everyone's property values." Marcus clenched his fists, struggling to keep his temper in check. "You're not going to touch it," he said through gritted teeth. "Not today, not ever." Karen's smile faltered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered. "We'll see about that," she said, her voice low and dangerous. The standoff ended with Marcus standing guard in front of the steel wall, his arms crossed, his eyes locked. On Karen, the volunteers scattered, muttering among themselves, and the cleanup day ended in awkward silence. But Marcus knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to back down, and neither was he. As the days turned into weeks, the conflict between Marcus and Karen continued to escalate. She started filing complaints with the city, claiming the steel wall violated local zoning laws. Marcus fought back, hiring a lawyer and gathering evidence to prove that the wall was within his rights. The legal battle dragged on, draining Marcus's time, energy, and savings, but he refused to give up. Meanwhile, strange things started happening around the neighborhood. Graffiti appeared on fences and sidewalks, all of it targeting Marcus. Rumors spread like wildfire, with people whispering about his criminal past and dangerous behavior. Marcus knew it was all lies, but the damage was done. He could feel the neighborhood turning against him, the once friendly faces now cold and distant. Through it all, the steel wall stood as a symbol of Marcus's defiance. It was battered and scarred, but it was still standing, and as long as it was there, Marcus knew he still had a chance. But what was Karen's next move? How far was she willing to go to get rid of the wall and Marcus? And what would happen when the two of them finally came face to face? The answers were coming. But for now, all Marcus could do was wait and prepare for the storm he knew was on the horizon. The tension in the neighborhood had reached a boiling point. Every day felt like a countdown to something inevitable, something explosive. Marcus could feel it in the air, the way people avoided eye contact, the way conversations stopped when he walked by, the way Karen's smug smile seemed to grow wider with each passing day. The steel wall, once a symbol of his defiance, now felt like a target painted on his back. But Marcus wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not ever. The legal battle with the city had taken a toll on him. The endless paperwork, the lawyer's fees, the sleepless nights spent worrying about what Karen might do next. It was all wearing him down. But Marcus refused to let it break him. He pored over zoning laws, gathered signatures from supportive neighbors, and even started a small online fundraiser to cover his legal costs. The support he received was a glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark situation. But for every person who stood by him, there seemed to be two more who sided with Karen. Karen, meanwhile, was relentless. She had turned the neighborhood into her personal stage, using every opportunity to paint Marcus as the villain. She organized petitions, wrote scathing letters to the local newspaper, and even started a social media campaign against him. Her posts were filled with half-truths and outright lies, but they were convincing enough to sway public opinion. The comments section was a minefield of accusations and insults, with people calling Marcus everything from a nuisance to a threat to the community. But Marcus wasn't the only one feeling the pressure. Karen's obsession with the steel wall was starting to consume her. She spent hours pacing her porch, glaring at the wall like it was a personal insult. Her once pristine lawn was now littered with protest signs, and her house had become a makeshift headquarters for her crusade against Marcus. It was clear that this wasn't just about the wall anymore. It was about control, about power, about winning. One night, Marcus was woken by the sound of his security alarm blaring. He bolted out of bed, his heart racing, and grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the door. The cameras had caught someone, a shadowy figure trying to tamper with the steel wall. Marcus rushed outside, bat in hand, but by the time he got there, the figure was gone. All that remained was a can of spray paint lying on the ground, the cap still off, and a fresh layer of red paint streaked across the wall. The message was simple but chilling. Last warning. Marcus's hands shook as he called the police, but he knew it wouldn't do much good. Without proof, there was nothing they could do. And Karen? She was nowhere to be found. But Marcus didn't need proof to know it was her. He could feel. The standoff at the steel wall left the neighborhood in a state of uneasy silence. The bulldozer had been driven away, the crowd had dispersed, and Karen had retreated to her house. Her face, a mask of barely contained fury. Marcus stood in front of his wall, his lawyer by his side, trying to process what had just happened. The injunction had bought him time, but it wasn't a victory, not really. Karen's words echoed in his mind. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. And Marcus knew she meant it. Over the next few days, the tension in the neighborhood grew thicker. Karen's supporters doubled down, plastering the streets with flyers and organizing protests outside Marcus's house. The local news even picked up the story, framing it as a neighborhood dispute but subtly siding with Karen's narrative. Marcus tried to stay out of the spotlight, but it was impossible. Everywhere he went, he felt like he was being watched, judged and whispered about. Then, one evening, Marcus received a phone call that changed everything. It was from a private investigator he'd hired weeks ago, a retired cop named Frank who specialized in digging up dirt. "I found something," Frank said, his voice low and urgent. "Something big. You're going to want to see this." Marcus met Frank at a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. The investigator slid a manila folder across the table, his expression grim. Inside were photos, documents, and a detailed report that made Marcus's blood run cold. Karen, it turned out, had a history. A long, complicated history of feuds, lawsuits, and even a few restraining orders. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was what Frank had uncovered about her finances. Karen was broke. Not just struggling, but completely underwater. Her house was in foreclosure, her credit cards maxed out, and she was facing a mountain of debt. The neighborhood activism wasn't just about control or power. It was a distraction, a way to keep people from noticing how desperate her situation had become. And the steel wall, it was the perfect scapegoat. If she could convince everyone that Marcus was the problem, maybe they wouldn't look too closely at her. Marcus sat back in his booth, his mind racing. This changed everything. Karen wasn't just a bully, she was desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. The next morning, Marcus decided to confront her, not out of anger, but out of a strange sense of pity. He walked up to her porch, the folder tucked under his arm, and knocked on the door. Karen answered, her eyes narrowing when she saw him. "What do you want?" she snapped. Marcus took a deep breath. "I know," he said simply. Karen's face went pale, but she quickly recovered. "Know what?" she asked, her voice trembling. Just enough to betray her nerves. "Everything," Marcus replied, holding up the folder. "The debt, the lawsuits, the foreclosure. I know it all." For a moment, Karen just stared at him, her jaw clenched, her hands shaking. Then, without warning, she lunged at him, trying to grab the folder. Marcus stepped back, holding it out of reach. "This doesn't have to get ugly," he said, "but if you don't back off, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth." Karen's eyes burned with rage, but there was something else there too. Fear. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. "Try me," Marcus said, his voice steady. The confrontation ended with Karen slamming the door in his face, but Marcus knew it wasn't over. If anything, he'd just made things worse. Karen was cornered. Now, and cornered animals were the most dangerous kind. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with possibilities. What would Karen do next? Would she back down, or would she double down? He didn't have to wait long for an answer. Around 2 a.m., his security alarm went off again. This time, the cameras caught more than just a shadowy figure. They caught Karen, clear as day, standing in front of the steel wall with a sledgehammer in her hands. Marcus bolted outside, but by the time he got there, she was gone. The wall was still standing, but it was clear she'd taken a few swings at it. The metal was dented, the paint chipped, and there was a fresh message scrawled across it in red spray paint. "You'll regret this." Marcus's heart pounded as he called the police. This time, he had proof. But when the officers arrived, they seemed reluctant to get involved. "It's a civil matter," one of them said, shrugging. "You'll need to take it up with the courts." Frustrated but determined, Marcus decided to take matters into his own hands. He posted the footage online, along with a detailed explanation of everything he'd uncovered about Karen. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The story went viral, with people from all over the country weighing in. Some supported Marcus, calling Karen a bully and a fraud. Others accused him of airing dirty laundry and making the situation worse. Karen, meanwhile, went radio silent. She stopped hosting her porch press conferences, stopped organizing protests, and even stopped answering her door. For a few days it seemed like she might actually back down. But Marcus knew better. He could feel it in his gut. Something was coming, something big. And then, one morning, it happened. Marcus woke up to find his front yard covered in trash, his car vandalized, and the steel wall gone. Not damaged, not dented, but completely gone. In its place was a gaping hole in the ground, as if the wall had been ripped out by the roots. Marcus stood there staring at the empty space, his mind reeling. How had she done it? And more importantly, what was she planning next? The answers were coming. But for now, all Marcus could do was wait, and wonder if he'd pushed her too far. The disappearance of the steel wall was like a punch to the gut. Marcus stood in his driveway, staring at the empty space where it had once stood, his mind racing. How had Karen done it? And where had she taken it? The questions swirled in his head, but there was no time to dwell on them. He could feel the weight of the neighborhood's eyes on him, the whispers growing louder with each passing second. This wasn't just about the wall anymore. It was about survival. Marcus grabbed his phone and called Frank, the private investigator. "I need your help," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Karen's gone too far this time. I need to find her now." Frank didn't ask questions. He just said, "I'm on it." While Frank worked his connections, Marcus decided to take matters into his own hands. He drove around the neighborhood searching for any sign of Karen or the wall. He checked her house, but it was empty, the windows dark and the porch eerily silent. He even stopped by the local junkyard, thinking she might have dumped it there, but no one had seen anything. As the hours ticked by, Marcus's frustration grew. He was about to give up and head home when his phone buzzed. It was Frank. "I found her," he said. "She's at the old warehouse on the edge of town, and you're not going to believe what she's doing." Marcus didn't hesitate. He jumped in his car and sped toward the warehouse, his heart pounding in his chest. When he arrived, he saw Karen's car parked outside, along with a large truck that looked like it belonged to a demolition crew. The warehouse doors were slightly ajar, and Marcus could hear voices inside. He crept closer, his breath shallow, his senses on high alert. Peeking through the crack in the doors, he saw Karen standing in the middle of the warehouse, barking orders at a group of men. And there, in the corner, was the steel wall, battered and scarred, but still intact. Marcus's blood boiled as he stepped inside, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Karen spun around, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment she looked like a deer caught in headlights, but then her expression hardened, and she crossed her arms, her lips curling into a smirk. "I'm taking back what's mine," she said. "Yours?" Marcus shot back. "That wall is on my property. You had no right to take it." Karen laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Your property? Please, that thing was an eyesore, and you know it. I'm doing the neighborhood a favor." Marcus took a step closer, his fists clenched at his sides. "This isn't about the neighborhood. Karen, this is about you, about your ego, about your need to control everything and everyone around you, but it ends here, right now." Karen's smirk faltered, but she didn't back down. "You think you've won," she spat. "You think this little stunt of yours is going to stop me? Think again." Before Marcus could respond, one of the men stepped forward, holding a crowbar. "You need to leave," he said, his voice low and threatening. Marcus stood his ground, his eyes locked on Karen. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not until she answers for what she's done." The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with the promise of violence. But, just as things were about to escalate, the sound of sirens cut through the silence. Marcus turned to see flashing lights outside the warehouse, and a moment later, the doors burst open. It was the police. Karen's face went pale as the officers stepped inside, their hands resting on their holsters. "We got a call about a disturbance," one of them said, his eyes scanning the room. "What's going on here?" Marcus didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, holding up his phone. "I have evidence," he said. "Karen stole my property, vandalized my home, and harassed me for months. It's all here." The officers took the phone, their expressions growing more serious as they scrolled through the footage. Karen tried to protest, but her words fell on deaf ears. Within minutes, she was in handcuffs, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. As the police led her away, Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. It was over. Finally, it was over. But just as he was about to leave, one of the YI officers stopped him. "There's something you should see," he said, leading Marcus to the back of the warehouse. There, hidden behind a stack of crates, was a large metal container. The officer opened it, revealing stacks of cash, jewelry, and other valuables. Marcus's eyes widened as he realized what he was looking at. "We've been investigating Karen for months," the officer explained. "She's been running a scam, targeting vulnerable homeowners and stealing from them. We just didn't have enough evidence to arrest her. Until now." Marcus stared at the container, his mind reeling. Karen wasn't just a bully. She was criminal. And thanks to him, she was finally going to pay for what she'd done. As he left the warehouse, Marcus felt a sense of closure he hadn't felt in months. The steel wall was gone, but so was Karen. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe again. But as he drove home, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Karen might be behind bars, but the damage she'd done would take time to heal. The neighborhood was still divided, the scars of the feud still fresh, and then there was the steel wall. Marcus knew he could rebuild it, make it stronger than ever. But did he want to? Or was it time to let go of the past and start fresh? The answers were his to find. But for now, all he could do was take it one day at a time, and as he pulled into his driveway, he couldn't help but smile. The wall might be gone, but he was still standing, and that was all that mattered. The days that followed Karen's arrest were a whirlwind of activity. The neighborhood, once divided and tense, began to slowly heal. People who had taken sides started to come together, united by the shared shock of Karen's crimes. The revelation of her scams and thefts had shaken everyone, but it also brought a sense of clarity. Marcus, once seen as the troublemaker, was now viewed in a different light. Neighbors who had avoided him began to stop by, offering apologies and words of support. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Marcus decided not to rebuild the steel. For Loico, it had served its purpose, standing as a symbol of his resilience and determination. But it was time to move on. Instead, he replaced it with a simple, sturdy mailbox, one that blended in with the rest of the neighborhood. It wasn't about making a statement anymore. It was about moving forward. The legal proceedings against Karen moved quickly. With the evidence Marcus and the police had gathered, she was charged with multiple counts of theft, fraud, and vandalism. Her trial became a local spectacle, with news outlets covering every detail. Marcus attended every hearing, not out of spite, but out of a need to see justice served. When the judge finally handed down the sentence, a significant prison term, Marcus felt a deep sense of closure. It was over, but life had a way of surprising him. A few weeks after the trial, Marcus received a letter in the mail. It was from Karen. His first instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity got the better of him. He opened it, bracing himself for anger or blame. Instead, he found something he hadn't expected, an apology. Karen's letter was raw and unfiltered. She wrote about her struggles, her mistakes, and the choices that had led her down such a destructive path. She didn't ask for forgiveness, she knew she didn't deserve it, but she wanted Marcus to know that she regretted what she'd done. "I lost myself," she wrote, "and in the process, I hurt a lot of people. I'm sorry." Marcus read the letter twice, his emotions swirling. He didn't know how to feel. anger, pity, relief. In the end, he decided not to respond. Some wounds took time to heal, and he wasn't ready to forgive her. But the letter did something unexpected. It gave him a sense of peace. Karen's actions had been her own, and he no longer carried the weight of her choices. As the weeks turned into months, the neighborhood continued to change. The tension that had once defined the street faded, replaced by a sense of community. People started hosting block parties again. Kids played in the yards, and the sound of laughter became a regular part of the background noise. Marcus found himself getting to know his neighbors in a way he never had before. He even joined the homeowners association, not to fight, but to help rebuild what had been broken. One evening, as the sun set over the quiet street, Marcus sat on his porch sipping a cup of coffee and watching the world go by. A neighbor waved as they walked their dog, and Marcus waved back, a small smile on his face. It was a simple moment, but it meant something. He had fought for his place in this neighborhood, and now, finally, it felt like home. The story of the steel wall became a local legend, a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride and the power of standing up for what's right. People still talked about it, but the tone had changed. It wasn't just about the conflict anymore. It was about resilience, about finding strength in the face of adversity, and about the importance of community. Marcus didn't see himself as a hero. He was just a man who had refused to back down. But his actions had inspired others. People who had once been afraid to speak up started to find their voices, standing up to bullies and fighting for what they believed in. The steel wall might be gone, but its legacy lived on. As for Marcus, he found a new sense of purpose. He started volunteering at a local community center, helping others who were facing their own battles. He shared his story, not to boast, but to remind people that they weren't alone. "You don't have to fight with a steel wall," he would say. "Sometimes all it takes is standing your ground and knowing you're worth it." The story of Karen and the steel wall had a lasting impact, not just on Marcus, but on everyone who had been a part of it. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments there is always hope, that even when the odds seem stacked against you, you can still come out on top, and that sometimes the strongest walls are the ones we build within ourselves. As Marcus sat on his porch that evening watching the stars come out, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had brought him to a place of peace. The steel wall was gone, but the lessons it had taught him would stay with him forever. And as he turned to go inside, he couldn't help but smile. The mailbox at the end of his driveway stood quietly, a simple reminder of how far he'd come. It wasn't just a mailbox anymore. It was a symbol of a new beginning, the end